All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session, Transform the Economics of Your Data Center with Backup as a Service. Today's speaker is Andy Fernandez, Director of Product Marketing here at HYCU. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away in the questions tab, and I'll be back at the end to share those questions you have with Andy. For now, I'm going to turn it over to him, and everyone enjoy the session.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everybody. My name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at HYCU. As we mentioned, the name of the session is Transform the Economics of Your Data Center with Backup as a Service. A couple housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded and available for you. If you have any questions, please submit a question and we will get to them by the end of the session. Before we get into the matter at hand, I want to tell you a little bit about who we are here at HYCU and where we're based out of and the organizations that fund us and our mission. So we are headquartered in Boston. We have more than 300 employees globally, and we are an organization and a service platform focused on multi-cloud, multi and hybrid cloud data protection, right? We are purpose-built for on-premise, public cloud, and SaaS applications. We'll get into the details of how we do that, why we do that later in the session. And we have a global presence. We have more than 3,200 customers in more than 78 countries, and that number is growing rapidly. We are also backed by Bain Capital, Acrew, Atlassian, and Cisco Investments. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we pride ourselves on being a multi-cloud organization. And that means that we explicitly work with and we are purpose-built for Azure, AWS, GCP, Office 365, Microsoft 365, Nutanix, Dell PowerScale, VMware, Kubernetes, and SAP HANA. These are some of our core platforms and workloads that we're able to protect. And we're going to talk about some of the nuances and capabilities that we have. But with that in mind, let's talk about today's challenge and today's problem statement. And one thing that I want to mention is at the beginning of the session is there is no correct answer of how your infrastructure should look as an organization. There are organizations that are still on premises explicitly. There are organizations that are hybrid cloud, right? They have some of the most critical applications on-prem, but they're now using the public cloud for DR, for backup, for application development. And then there's the early adopters, the rapid adopters who are now completely have lifted and shifted into the public cloud and are running production there. There is a way to mix and match all of these. There is no right path, but what we do know is we have to find the strategy that works best for your organization. And in understanding that, one thing to address is, regardless of the infrastructure strategy that you have and where your workloads are located, whether you're in control of them on-prem or you're using the public cloud, data protection is critical across all of those, from on-premises to the public cloud. As long as there are people in this world, as long as we're using hardware at some point, there is going to be a need to protect your data. There's several downtime and data loss scenarios that I would call common denominators that sit across whether you're fully on premises or 100% in the cloud. Number one of them is ransomware. I think we've all understood the challenge that ransomware has provided us, but also the criticality of it, right? Every couple of seconds, there's a ransomware attack, and they are growing in severity, they are growing in volume, and they're much more intelligent about targeting your backup, your DR infrastructure to make sure that you have to pay for ransom. So whether it's on-premise or fully in the cloud, ransomware is a concern. Whether another area is the usual suspects that we've always seen, right? Accidental deletions, logical errors, corruptions, even outages from a DR perspective. And you may be asking, Andy, well, I understand that I need to do this on-prem. I understand that I've always been in control of that. I own those applications. I own the backup. But what about the public cloud? Don't the big three, don't AWS, Azure, GCP, do that for me? Don't they have high availability built in and resilience to help me do that? And the answer is no. It's a shared responsibility model. The public cloud is very resilient infrastructure, but when it comes to your applications and your data, you are responsible for protecting, for recovering, and for managing it. And so it's critical to know that when these scenarios happen in the public cloud, you will still be responsible for addressing them and be held accountable for being able to recover. So now we know that data protection is critical across the board, regardless of your strategy regardless of the infrastructure and the applications that you have. There is no way out of having responsibility for that data. But here's the tricky area. Here's the aspect that becomes a challenge. You understand that you have to protect this data, but how do you do it? And how do you do it without consuming all of your time, energy, resources, and attention as an IT organization? Well, that's where we look at what are the three core challenges that you as an organization, whether you are small, you're a startup, an SMB, you're a mid-sized organization, even a Fortune 500, you all have very similar challenges. And there are three categories for them. The first one is data silo sprawl. My data is everywhere, located in disparate databases with different tools, services that are required for me to manage them, for me to have visibility into them. We actually see that organizations have over 150 data silos. So this brings in significant challenges. If somebody asks you at a glance, where several of these workloads, where several of these applications sit, are they protected? Are they compliant? Are they secure? That becomes a very serious challenge. Now, that kind of crosses over into making sure that you're protecting all of these workloads, these applications that are siloed across your organization. And when you think about it, historically, backup technologies, backup solutions, DR solutions have always been about keeping the lights on. They're about you need to make sure that if something happens, that you're covered, that your organization is resilient. But we know that there's a movement to make sure that IT isn't just a cost center, but an area of the business that is helping grow revenue. But yet your organization and you personally from an IT perspective are held responsible for protecting, for recovering, and for having to manage all of these solutions, all of the resources that it takes to be able to do this effectively. This was already a pretty significant challenge on-prem where you had people's entire jobs were focused on this, backup DR administrators doing so. But when you add cloud to the equation, it just becomes much more difficult just to keep the lights on. And as I mentioned, right, being able to protect hybrid multi-cloud environments with consistency is incredibly difficult. It was easy to make sure that we protect all your virtual machines that sit on-prem. But what about your SaaS applications? What about your containerized applications? What about your instances that live in the public cloud? How are you protecting them? Are you doing it effectively, or are you just checking the box? These are the three core challenges that we're going to talk about today, because I believe that these are the future of what data protection services have to be able to solve for. Throughout this presentation, we're going to dive into these three. We're going to talk about the selection criteria you need when you're evaluating not only the data protection solution of today, but the one of the future for your organization as well. And then at the end, we'll cover how HYCU Protege is able to solve these challenges for you. Now, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit more about this data silo sprawl. I know I mentioned at the beginning there's over 150 for mid-sized organizations, sprawls or silos that they have. But let's talk about just the silos that you have in your data protection environment. Now, let's rewind 10. Let's go back 10, 15 years ago, right? Things were a lot simpler back then for many reasons. But ultimately, you know that you had your on-premise applications that sat on VMware vSphere, maybe sat on Nutanix, and you were responsible for protecting them. So easily enough, you were able to select a solution that was built, whether it was a hardware appliance or an agent-based software solution that was providing backup of these applications and these VMs for you. Now, even in these solutions, you still had multiple interfaces to be able to deal with not only executing on backup operations, but getting visibility, reporting, and monitoring. So you already had a couple areas there. Many organizations were using multiple backup tools for different types of purposes, some for day-to-day recovery, operational recovery, some for long-term retention, and even archival purposes. Now, this was all on premise, but many organizations also addressed having a secondary site. I need to perform disaster recovery. We need orchestration. We need to be able to recover from an outage, power outage, natural disasters, you name it. So naturally, organizations would bring in a DR solution for these on-premise virtual machines as well. Now, this is a separate area where you have to address a separate solution that requires different education, different levels of services, and just a completely different interaction that you have to deal with, let alone the technology itself. But now, if you wanted to know what is the state of your protection when it comes to DR, can you fail over? Have you failed over? Have you been able to test that failover? Completely different company with completely different interfaces that you had to address. And then you got that knock on the door that I think everyone over the last decade has gotten, where it's you have to move to the public cloud. Or maybe you thought it was best for your organization to move to the public cloud. Maybe you took baby steps, maybe you lifted and shifted. And ultimately, that meant that you needed a solution to be able to get you there, to be able to help you migrate, hopefully with minimal data loss, with minimal downtime, and that you can do so in a pretty quick amount of time. There's also migrations that you had to perform on-prem to on-prem, right, because of mergers and acquisitions, consolidations, but we're going to talk today a little bit about more cloud migrations. And so now you have your backup solution, your DR solution, this entirely new solution that you had to learn to be able to migrate to AWS or Azure or GCP. And then you adopted additional workloads. Whether you adopted instances in the cloud that you spun up, these are born in the cloud VMs, or additional SaaS services like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce, you now have a separate tool, a separate service, even if it's in the same backup solution that you were using, the platform that they provided, this is still a completely separate interaction. So now you're dealing with more than 10 interfaces just to be able to know, where's my data? Can I protect it? To be able to execute on a recovery, a restore, or a failover. You are now dealing with a sprawl, not on your entire data as an organization where you have 150 silos, but on the solutions that you're using to protect that data. And that's simply unacceptable. With one, budgets are not changing from an IT perspective, right? So you have to make sure that you're very intelligent with how you're using your resources, your time, and labor to be able to do so. And IT, the requests from IT are not just around keeping the lights on, but it's around building the business. This is not something that's acceptable in this day and age, to have these many types of interfaces and experiences to be able to simply keep the lights on. Now, as I mentioned, that was just addressing the silos and the sprawl of this data and the tools that you're using. Let's just isolate one. Let's talk about your on-prem VM backup. You now have to go through an entire exercise around getting this running in your system. What does it take from day one, where you make a decision and you select a vendor, to the moment that you are protecting that? What does that look like? One, you have to perform sizing and planning exercise. What are my infrastructure requirements? What do I need to do to make sure that this will work effectively and that we are storing data at the right period of time that we've designated? Once you've done this exercise, this is after you've done a POC, after you've gone through the demos and you've made your selection, then you have to go through your installation and deployment, whether it's waiting for an appliance to be shipped in or downloading an age-based software that takes a lot of time, not only to just get access to, but to get up and running. And that can take hours, days, weeks for an organization, depending on the size of your environment as well. Then you're up and running, right? You're protecting your VMs, but there's always continuous work that's required. You have to maintain and you have to upgrade. You have to do this yourself because you own the software. It's a perpetual license and you've done this. And then when you want to add more VMs to protect, your environment grows, or you simply need to renew, you need to engage in some form of this process again. These are the things that you had to do just to be able to protect on-premise VMs. Now, what about your disaster recovery solution? What about the services you were using for migration? What about what you're doing for cloud and cloud backup and disaster recovery? And that's not even counting addressing SaaS backup. So it's very clear that as a collective in IT, we're spending a lot of time protecting our data. We're spending a lot of time keeping the lights on. But the reality is because the solutions that we've been given to protect them are not enough for today's organizations. They are too difficult to maintain and they take too much time and resource. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about, well, Andy brought up some good points here, but who can actually offer this? How do I even go about selecting? How do I evaluate somebody that can eliminate and solve for these challenges? There's three core areas. When you think about, I'm choosing data protection for now and data protection for the future, what should I be looking for? And there's three areas. The one is true software as a service. What I mean by this is, as I mentioned, a significant amount of administrative overhead goes into just getting these services or solutions up and running. Planning, configuration, maintenance, upgrades, you have to do this all yourself. These are one of the things that are driving a lot of the resource requirements that you have. So when you think about, I need a backup, a DR, migration solution for my organization as a whole, you have to make sure it's software as a service, or something you can simply subscribe to and pay as you go. in a very simple, easy to use experience. This should take minutes. It should not take hours. It should not take weeks. It should not take months to be able to deploy data protection software. And so what I mentioned, the most critical area of this to be able to save time and resource is make sure that you're using software as a service. The next area is, depending on your journey, depending on your fully on-premise, hybrid, or multi-cloud, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to leverage purpose-built protection. Many organizations we saw where you would have your on-prem backup, and they would say, hey, we're able to give you the experience where you can do backup to cloud, and we can even protect your cloud native workloads. But what did they do? How did they do this? Well, they have a great software that was meant for on-prem VM backup. And they retrofitted and built around it and added agents to be able to connect and protect workloads in the cloud to the cloud. This brings that same baggage, that same time, resource, and energy to install, deploy, configure to your public cloud workloads. These are meant to be fast. These are meant to be operationally sound, but you're bringing old solutions to solve for them. So make sure that what you're driving, what you're using doesn't use agents and is purpose-built for the workloads that you're trying to protect, from Nutanix and VMware to AWS, GCP, Azure, even Microsoft 365. And to address the biggest concern of them all, data silo sprawl, you need something that provides unified management. One area where you can understand at a glance, how are my protected VMs doing? Can I protect? Can I recover? Can I perform backup operations from each of these? If you don't have that unified management experience, you are still going to be spending a lot of time and resources understanding where things are. So with this selection criteria in mind, let's talk a little bit about how HYCU is able to solve for these challenges. And what we're talking about today is HYCU Protege, right? This is hybrid and multi-cloud data protection. And regardless of where your organization sits on your cloud infrastructure strategy, HYCU Protege gives you backup, disaster recovery, migrations, think multi-cloud mobility as well, for on-premises, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, the first one is, if your organization is still protecting on-premises workloads, HYCU is able to offer you purpose-built data protection. This is backup and DR for Nutanix and VMware. This is diverse platform support. This also includes Dell. That's agentless, built for Nutanix, built for VMware, built for Dell, that also gives you migration and DR capabilities. So if you think, well, I can't replace my backup on-prem, even if I'm using somebody like HYCU to protect my cloud workloads, you are able to protect, purpose-built, and natively protect your VMware, your Nutanix, and your Dell on-prem workloads. Now, what if you're thinking about a hybrid cloud strategy? I want to go to the cloud. I want to be able to continue to retain my on-premises applications, but use the cloud for backup and disaster recovery. HYCU is able to support that journey to the cloud as well. You can move workloads between on-prem and cloud, coupled with DR capabilities for them as well. This is an incredible value add to be able to take baby steps, unlock the value of the cloud, but still continue to have the control that you have on premises. And then ultimately, for those organizations that are either slowly or rapidly lifting and shifting, you have full multi-cloud support. Once again, this is agentless backups. This is not, bringing the solution that was built for VMware and Nutanix and then retrofitting into the public cloud. This is purpose-built agentless backup, DR, and migrations that are provided as a service, right? That you can simply click, subscribe to, add your account ID, and start protecting. So the core value here is, one, you need to be able to address data silos. You need to be able to have something that gives you a purpose-built protection for the workloads that you're trying to protect. And it needs to be easy to use. And regardless where you sit on this journey, HYCU is able to give you backup, DR, and migrations for that as well. Now let's talk a little bit more about specifics, right? One thing I mentioned about data silo sprawls is, if you don't have unified management of this, you are not able to solve for a lot of the common issues that happen within data protection in hybrid and multi-cloud environments. With HYCU Protege, from one single interface, you're able to execute on your Nutanix, your VMware, your GCP, Azure, AWS, and Office 365. This means that you have one central location, one single service, and one area where you're able to address all of this, where you have visibility at a glance of everything that's going on. Sometimes it's a challenge just to have complete visibility of each of these platforms. For example, if you're using something like AWS, even in AWS, it's a challenge to understand where are my instances, where are they protected, what is their status, where do I even go to perform a file restore. With HYCU, you're able to solve for that across all of these types of workloads, across these platforms. So it's a critical area that we're addressing here, not only for the workloads that you have today, maybe you have a hybrid cloud strategy, but the multi-cloud strategy of the future. If you're thinking about adding SaaS applications as well, you have to make sure that you have one interface to be able to protect, manage, and recover these. Now, here's another area as well. Data silo sprawl is a huge pain point, and we're able to solve for that. But the second pain point is how much time, resource, and effort is being dedicated to simply keep the lights on. And that's why you have to move away from point legacy solutions to fully managed software as a service. As I mentioned, with HYCU, you have zero deployment, maintenance, and configuration. For example, if you're looking to protect workloads in Azure or in GCP or in AWS, you simply subscribe, add your instances, assign a policy, a backup policy, and you've started protecting. Not weeks of downloading and evaluating, sizing, configuring correctly to make sure that your environment is sound before you start protecting, but simply subscribing and protecting in minutes. As easy as that. And you're eliminating that infrastructure planning and sizing because you're using cloud scale architecture, right? It's making sure you use the best of the cloud, which is their snapshots, their elasticity, and their services to be able to quickly get up and running without having to configure and deploy large scale software implementation. And ultimately, you're also increasing your cost savings, right? This is a cloud smart design, and it's balanced for any region in the public cloud as well. It's a critical area, especially when you're thinking about or evaluating your current on-prem backup for your public cloud workloads. If you think about what they do with agents, with the way that they're deploying this, with the expectations that are upon you on maintenance, management, upgrade, you have to think about a cloud smart design that is a architecture that was purpose built for the cloud without the need for agents. And you're only able to get that if you're using a true software as a service type of solution like HYCU Protege. Now, here's another key area, and I keep harping on this because it's so critical. You have to make sure that it is purpose built, regardless of what you're using, that you are using the right design for that type of workload, whether on-prem or cloud native. Because in HYCU over the last couple of years, we've dedicated serious investment, serious engineering resources to be able to design and create purpose-built backup and disaster recovery for Nutanix, VMware, Azure, AWS, and GCP. And because of this, we've done it without the need for agents. These are agentless snapshot-based backups of your VMs and your cloud instances. There is no performance penalty. A lot of the organizations we've seen, you have your nightly backup because of the strain that puts on production. Not with HYCU. You're not using agents. You are performing something in a much more efficient, simple way. And as we mentioned, this was purpose-built for the cloud. And when I say that, you're not adding snapshots on top of that. You're not having to configure things on your own, even when you're using something like AWS or Azure or GCP. You are leveraging native snapshots, native identity access management, and the elasticity of the cloud. This gives you a much more efficient, both from a cost, but also from a performance perspective. And ultimately, as we mentioned, it gives you that single pane of glass for all workloads, where it's one unified experience, one interface where you're able to protect, manage, and recover both public cloud and on-premises workloads. That even includes things like Microsoft 365. So when we think about this, as we mentioned, the selection criteria, data protection today and for the future should be about giving you resilience, giving you peace of mind, that regardless of where your data is, you have one single place where you're able to protect it, to manage it, and you're able to protect or recover from anything like a ransomware attack, to the usual suspects of deletions, logical failures, but also to remain compliant and to retain data as long as you need without any issues or without added cost. So ultimately, HYCU Protege is about giving you full flexibility and control, regardless of where your data is, on-prem, hybrid, or multi-cloud as well. Now, with that in mind, I think it's always better for you to be able to see that yourself, for you to be able to understand exactly how this is, to be able to look at that interface and see how simple and effective HYCU Protege is. I've added the link in the chat, so you're able to just schedule a demo there, or you're able to see this link, type it in your browser as well. But ultimately, access this, and you will have a personalized demo according to your needs and what you're looking for, and we will show you how this works. We'll show you how we solve for these challenges. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all for your time and your attention today. We will be here to answer any additional questions, and I believe that we already have some that have come up. So with that, I will lead to Matt, who will bring up those questions.
All right. Thanks, Andy, so much. That was a great presentation. We have a couple minutes for some of these questions. We won't get to everything, but we will follow up with anyone we don't get to during this session. So the first one here is, are there any compliance or security issues with using HYCU Protege?
Great question. That's something that comes up a lot. And the reason that comes up is when organizations are looking at protecting their workloads in the public cloud, a lot of these services are storing their data for them, which is adding additional hoops for you to cross or pass or jump when it comes to where is this data being located? Is this secure? Is this according to my internal compliance? And with HYCU, we eliminate any of those decisions because we do not store your data. HYCU allows you to leverage your storage, your instances, your compute, your AWS, your GCP, your Azure account. We simply enable you to automate the protection of this data. So we do not store that data, so you don't have to deal with where is this data being located, how is it protected. We eliminate that from the equation.
Cool. So if you can tackle this one in 2 minutes, it's a pretty big question, but doesn't the cloud protect my data?
Absolutely. That I can go on and on about that one, but in short, ultimately, no. The cloud is resilient, but you are responsible for your data. They tell you that in the shared responsibility model. So regardless of which public cloud provider you're looking at, that includes SaaS as well, like Microsoft 365, you are responsible for that. You can leverage native services that they offer, but you have to do it yourself. And you have to protect, manage, and recover yourself. So ultimately, regardless of the decision you make, you need some type of data protection solution to protect those workloads.
All right. And then the last one here will just be, what SaaS applications does HYCU support?
Yeah, so that's a critical one as well. One of the most important areas that people do not protect are their mailboxes, their Teams discussions. These things are critical. If your emails that are critical go and are deleted accidentally, how do you recover them? These are important things, whether it's because of regulation or simply for having accessibility to your data. And that's why we're able to effectively protect Microsoft 365 as well.
All right. So we will leave it there for now and wrap this up. I want to thank everyone in the audience who showed up and for all the great questions that you guys asked. And of course, to Andy for your time and insight into how to transform your data center with backup as a service.
Thank you so much, man.
All right. Have a great evening, morning, wherever you are, everyone, and we'll see you soon.